Why do you feel anxious for no reason? Some mornings you wake up and everything is fine. No deadlines, no bad news, no reason to be afraid. But there's something in your chest pulling tight. Quiet, slow, like an invisible hand pressing into your sternum from the inside. You look around. Nothing's there. You take a breath. Still there. Your body is vibrating at a frequency your mind can't reach, can't name, can't shut off. You've told yourself you're weak, too sensitive, that you're making problems out of nothing. But today, I'm going to tell you something that maybe no one has ever told you before. What you're feeling isn't a disorder, it isn't a flaw. It's evidence that your brain is running a program that millions of years of evolution hardwired into it, and that ancient civilizations recognized long before neuroscience had a name for it. Stay until part 5, because I'm going to reveal what your brain actually does at 3 in the morning. And once you hear it, you will never look at your sleepless nights the same way again. Let's start with what scientists call the prediction machine. Your brain doesn't passively receive reality like a camera recording whatever's in front of it. According to predictive processing theory developed by neuroscientist Carl Friston and increasingly embraced by modern neuroscience, your brain is constantly generating predictions about what's about to happen, then comparing those predictions against the actual sensory signals coming in from the world. When there's a mismatch between the prediction and reality, what scientists call a prediction error, your brain immediately fires off a warning signal. Anxiety with no apparent cause, in this sense, is what happens when your brain is running too many negative predictions with not enough real-world data to cancel them out. Your brain is worrying on your behalf before you even know what you're worried about. The real question isn't why your brain does this. The question is, when did it learn to? The part of your brain most responsible for anxiety is the amygdala, an almond-shaped structure buried deep in the limbic system, built millions of years before humans were anything more than prey animals on the African savanna. The amygdala cannot tell the difference between a leopard chasing you and a work email sitting in your inbox. To it, a threat is a threat, and its response is always the same. Activate the HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, flooding your bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline, pushing your entire body into fight or flight. The irony is that in the modern world, the leopard is almost gone, but your amygdala is still running like it never left, and it's sharper than ever. Because your modern brain can imagine the leopard without ever needing to see one. The ancient Greeks had a word for this feeling, deimos, a terror without a specific shape. Different from phobos, which is fear with a clear target, deimos is the kind of dread that haunts you like a shadow with no light source. In Greek mythology, Deimos was the god who always stood behind soldiers in battle, never appearing, but always there. Thousands of years have passed, and you're still carrying Deimos with you every single day without knowing his name. But that's not the whole story, because if free-floating anxiety were only about the amygdala and evolution, everyone would experience it in the same way and at the same intensity. Clearly, that's not the case. Some people wake up calm. Others wake up and immediately feel like something is about to go wrong, without knowing what. That difference doesn't live in the mind, it lives in the body. More specifically, in your nervous system, which stores memories not as language, but as sensation. Bessel van der Kolk, the Dutch psychiatrist who spent decades researching psychological trauma, demonstrated that the body holds on to what the mind tries to forget. What he described isn't metaphor, it's real biology. When you go through something stressful or painful, large or small, your autonomic nervous system doesn't encode it as a verbal memory. It encodes it as a pattern of physical activation, elevated heart rate, tightened muscles, shallower breath. And over time, that pattern becomes your body's default setting, the state it automatically returns to, even when nothing in your external life is wrong. This is why you can feel anxious without knowing why. Not because there's no reason, but because the reason is stored somewhere deeper than language, deeper than consciousness, in your muscle tissue, in your breathing patterns, in reflexes you can't consciously control. Neuroscientist Stephen Porges, who developed polyvagal theory, explains that the human nervous system has 3 evolved states. The social safety state, regulated by the ventral vagal nerve, the fight or flight state, regulated by the sympathetic system, and the freeze state, regulated by the dorsal vagal nerve. When your nervous system has learned through past experiences, especially in childhood, that the world is not safe, it defaults to the second or third state. Even when your current life is completely stable, your body is afraid of something from the past. And because it has no other way to express that, it translates it into anxiety in the present, with no clear reason attached. Tibetan Buddhism has a concept called body karma, not quite the same as the popular meaning of karma, but pointing to patterns of reaction that become so deeply impressed into the nervous system through repetition that they run automatically. Tibetan teachers say that meditation practice isn't about escaping the body, it's about inhabiting it more fully so that the nervous system can learn safety from the inside, rather than searching for reassurance from the outside. This isn't mystical theory, this is exactly what modern neuroscience is now confirming with measurable data. Your body is a journal you've never read, and your unexplained anxiety is how it's been trying to talk to you. If you're watching this video, hit subscribe right now, because what we're about to go into in the next 3 parts, the neuroscience of intuition, collective anxiety, and what your brain does at 3 in the morning, is something most people will never hear. Now let me offer a possibility that a lot of people will find hard to believe, but which has a more solid scientific foundation than you might think. What if some of your inexplicable anxiety isn't actually inexplicable? What if it's a signal completely real, carrying genuine information, but coming from a source your conscious mind doesn't have direct access to? At the HeartMath Institute in California, researchers measured participants' physiological responses before showing them emotionally intense images. What they found couldn't be easily explained by ordinary logic. Participants' heart rate and heart rate variability began to shift an average of 4 to 5 seconds before the images appeared, a phenomenon they called pre-stimulus response. The body was reacting to something the mind didn't yet know was coming. This isn't spirituality. This is measurable physiological data. And it raises a question that science is still working to answer. Does our nervous system process information through pathways that consciousness never gets to see? According to cognitive neuroscience, the answer is yes. Your central nervous system processes an estimated 11 million bits of information per second from your environment. Your conscious mind, by comparison, handles about 40 to 50 bits. That means more than 99.99% of what your nervous system knows about the world never reaches awareness. But it doesn't disappear, it accumulates, gets synthesized, and sometimes surfaces in the only form consciousness can access, a feeling. That vague unease with no apparent cause may be your nervous system trying to communicate a calculation it simply cannot put into words. Someone in the room whose behavior is inconsistent, a situation that structurally mirrors something that once hurt you. Something in your environment drifting off your brain's predicted model before your brain has identified what. The Japanese have a concept called kan. The closest English translation is intuition, but the full meaning goes much further. In Japanese martial arts and Zen practice, kan is the ability to read an entire situation without analyzing it piece by piece. A skilled fighter doesn't think, is he going to strike? He already knows before the thought forms. The Sufi tradition calls something similar kashf, an Arabic word meaning the lifting of the veil. The idea that human beings have multiple layers of perception, and the surface layer, the analytical mind, is actually the coarsest one, not the most refined. Deeper layers, they believed, can perceive things that the analytical mind would need hours to reach. So the next time you feel unsettled without knowing why, try asking not, why am I anxious, but what is my nervous system trying to tell me? That's a completely different question, and it opens a completely different door. Here's something most people never notice, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. Sometimes your anxiety isn't yours. Your nervous system is biologically designed to resonate with the nervous systems of the people around you. This isn't a metaphor. It's a real physiological function, carried out by a network scientists call the mirror neuron system. In 1992, neuroscientist Giacomo Rizzolatti at the University of Parma accidentally discovered that a group of neurons in the premotor cortex of monkeys fired not only when the monkey performed an action, but when it watched another creature perform the same action. These cells, later found to have a human equivalent, allow us not just to observe another person's emotions, but to actually experience them in our own bodies to some degree. When you sit next to someone who is deeply anxious, your nervous system doesn't simply register that they're anxious. It begins to mirror that neurological state. Your heart rate may nudge upward, your muscles may tighten slightly. You may start feeling unsettled without knowing why, because consciously, you haven't noticed that you're absorbing their anxiety. This gets amplified enormously in the digital world. When you scroll through social media and encounter hundreds of people who are anxious, angry, or afraid, even if they're thousands of miles away, your mirror neuron system is still processing and reflecting those emotional states. You're not just reading the news, you're downloading fragments of the neurological states of millions of people directly into your own nervous system. This is why study after study consistently shows that social media use correlates with generalized anxiety, even when the content you're consuming has nothing directly to do with your own life. Hindu tradition has a concept called collective karma, the idea that communities, families, and even entire societies can carry shared emotional patterns passed down across generations, not necessarily through genes, but through behavior, language, and the emotional atmosphere children grow up inside. Modern science calls this epigenetic transmission. Studies of descendants of famine survivors, war survivors, and people who experience severe trauma show that stress-induced changes in how genes are expressed can be inherited by the next generation. Your children, and even your grandchildren, may carry a biological imprint of things you or your parents once feared. Your anxiety sometimes didn't start with you. It started long before you. And recognizing that, not to assign blame, but to understand, is the first real step toward putting it down.
Everything is falling apart.
And now, this is what I promised you from the beginning. What actually happens on the nights you wake at 2 or 3 in the morning with anxiety rolling in like a wave? No trigger, no reason, just darkness and a heaviness in your chest you can't explain. This is not random. And once you understand why it happens, it will never feel quite as frightening again. During a normal sleep cycle, the brain moves through several distinct stages. One of the most critical is NREM, stage 3, slow wave sleep, during which the brain performs what's called synaptic homeostasis, pruning neural connections, consolidating important memories, and clearing out unnecessary information. During this process, the glymphatic system, discovered by neuroscientist Maiken Nedergaard in 2013, pumps cerebrospinal fluid through the brain to wash away metabolic waste products, including beta-amyloid protein linked to Alzheimer's disease. Your brain is essentially running a deep clean on itself while you sleep, like a city that turns off its lights so the maintenance crew can work. But around 2 to 4 in the morning, as the body transitions between sleep cycles, there's a window where the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for emotional regulation and rational thought, is operating at its lowest point of the entire day. Meanwhile, the amygdala is still very much awake. The result? You surface from sleep in a state where the amygdala is broadcasting loudly and no one is alert enough to edit what it's saying. This is why everything feels worse at 3 in the morning. Not because the situation is actually worse, but because your brain is running without its emotional regulation tools. The amygdala is shouting, the prefrontal cortex is offline, and you're caught between them with no referee. On top of that, circadian rhythm research shows that cortisol, the primary stress hormone, begins rising naturally around 2 to 3 a.m. to prepare the body for waking. If you happen to surface at that moment, you'll feel that cortisol wave before any external reason for it exists. The anxiety arrives first, the reason comes second. Your brain is simply trying to find an explanation for what it's already feeling in the body. The ancient Egyptians believed that the middle of the night was when the veil between the visible world and the invisible world was at its thinnest. They called it duat, the in-between realm where the soul was in the middle of its journey toward rebirth. To them, this wasn't a time to fear, it was a time to listen for voices that the daytime drowned out. The Japanese Zen tradition practiced walking meditation specifically in the hours before dawn, when the mind sits in a half-waking state. Because Zen masters believed this was when the mind is unguarded, when the ordinary defenses of the ego are thinnest. And remarkably, neuroscience confirms this in its own language. The state between sleeping and waking, called the hypnagogic or hypnopompic state, is characterized by theta brainwaves oscillating between 4 and 8 hertz, the same waves that appear during deep meditation, during peak creative flow, and during moments people describe as sudden insight or breakthrough. At 3 in the morning, while you're lying there feeling anxious, your brain is actually in one of its most interesting and active states. It just lacks the context to understand what's happening to it. I promised you at the start that once you understood all of this, you'd never see your anxiety the same way again. Now you have the full picture. Unexplained anxiety is not weakness. It is not illness. It is not an overactive imagination. It's a prediction machine running too hot, a nervous system holding memories that language can't reach, a receiver picking up signals that consciousness hasn't decoded yet, a resonance with the collective fear of everyone around you, and a brain doing its job of protecting you, even when it's working a little too hard. The first thing you need to do is not stop the anxiety. It's to name it. Neuroscientists call this affect labeling. When you put language on an emotion, amygdala activity measurably decreases while prefrontal cortex activity increases. You don't need to know why you're anxious. You just need to say to yourself, I'm feeling anxious. This is a sensation in my body. It is not the truth about my future.
It all makes sense
Then breathe.
now.
Not normally,
I can
but
see
deliberately
the whole
slow,
picture.
with your exhale longer than your inhale. Science calls this resonance breathing, and it activates the vagus nerve, pulling the autonomic nervous system out of fight or flight and back towards safety and connection. The people of ancient India called it pranayama and practiced it for thousands of years before science had a name for what it was doing. But the most important thing of all is to stop fighting the anxiety. The paradox in neuroscience is that resistance and fear of anxiety actually amplifies the anxiety signal because you're stacking one layer of danger on top of another. When you can look at your anxiety and think, this is my nervous system trying to protect me. I appreciate that, but I am safe. That thought begins to teach your nervous system something new. This is what Vipassana meditation calls equanimity. Not indifference, but the ability to witness a feeling without being swept away by it. Not fighting it, not amplifying it, just seeing it clearly. And inside that clear seeing, there's a small space between the sensation and your response to it. That space is freedom. Your nervous system can relearn. The brain has neuroplasticity, the capacity to form new connections and weaken old ones, even in adults. It doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with this. The first time you look at your anxiety not with fear, but with genuine curiosity.